now that we've officially synced up, I wanted to ask you the question. Hey, Peter, do you remember when we had a podcast?
Podcast, is that like a type of animal? What is that?
Something like that. A loud, obnoxious one.
Doesn't sound familiar. I'll trust you, though.
Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin?
You say Kevin, a.k.a. K-Slugs.
That's what it is. Shit. It's been a long time. Kevin, a.k.a. K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, a.k.a. Deal for Real, and I'm also your host.
Well, damn. It's been a long time since we've done another one of these, but I'm glad to say that we are back for another episode.
Indeed. This one in particular has been a long time coming and has quite the interesting story behind it. Kev, do you mind if I tell kind of the lore behind this episode?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Cool. So I'm sure you guys have probably seen the title. We are going to be talking about EarthBound today. But for a little bit of context, we originally planned to record this episode with my brother Ian, who has been on his own share of podcasts and is a fellow epic gamer. And so we sat down one day over a year ago during the summer of 2021. We all sat down and we were ready to record. And I swear, not 2 minutes after we sit down, my brother's wife says, "Hey, I think our baby's about ready to come out." And so then, of course, parenting duties and childbirth certainly took priority over recording the podcast that day. And since then, they've been busy being wonderful parents to a wonderful little girl who we all love very much. Unfortunately, that means that it's hard for my brother to take time away to join the podcast. So we are doing this episode without him, but I just think that story is really funny and I wanted to share with everybody.
It is really funny. Can you imagine if he'd be like, "Not now, honey. I'm recording a podcast."
Lord.
Give me like an hour and a half.
She can wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, so EarthBound is a game that has a lot of, I don't want to say baggage because that makes it sound like a bad thing, but it's definitely one of those like really cult classic games would be the briefest way to describe it. It's a game that has been hugely influential, especially lately, like in the past 10 years or so, with kind of like the quirky indie RPGs like your Undertales and your Amoris and all that stuff. Like being influenced by EarthBound is pretty much a meme by this point. A good meme because many of the games that are inspired by it are actually good, but a meme nonetheless. But there is a little bit of interesting lore about the game also. Kev, if you do you mind if I continue along that track?
Sure, man.
Cool. I just like to get your permission before I talk too much.
Yeah.
So EarthBound is the second entry in the series called Mother. The first Mother game did not come out in the US, so when Mother 2, aka EarthBound, was released, outside of Japan, they decided not to call it Mother 2 because then all of us would be like, well, what the heck is Mother 1? We don't know what this is. But the Mother series was created by a person named Shigesato Itoi, who actually started his career as a writer, like a novelist. He wrote novels, essays, short stories. He actually collaborated with a very famous Japanese author named Haruki Murakami. So if any literature nerds out there recognize the name, that's kind of a fun fact. But yeah, Shigesato Itoi was famous for, and is still famous in Japan for his writing. And I think that's really clear when you play EarthBound, because like a lot of the appeal of the game is from the writing and the story and the characters and stuff. So I think that's an interesting way to look at the game.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think one of the game's strengths really comes from its writing and storytelling, which we'll get to when we talk about those things. But yeah, really interesting facts, Pete Boy.
Thank you. I guess the last fact I'll close out with is that this game came out in, I think, the summer of 94 in Japan and then the summer of 95 in the US of A. So pretty big delay there. I think the localization took a long time because of how important the writing was and how much they had to like kind of translate while keeping the original intent and all that sort of stuff. It's a very interesting story. There's actually like a whole book about the translation of EarthBound, I think. So,
Damn.
yeah, just adding to the mountains of lore behind this game.
1995 hype.
Hype. Very good year. But yeah, that'll close out my my piece for the context.
Yeah, for my end of things, when we had originally discussed to like do this episode and we were like talking about doing it, I didn't play through much of it when we were about to record with Ian. And then once that all happened, I was like, okay, well, that'll give me some more time to actually play through this game properly and, give it a lot more time and hopefully, play through the whole damn thing. But for reasons we may discuss later, I did not finish the whole thing, but I definitely got a good chunk of it in, and yeah, I'm excited to give my thoughts on this game. I think it's it's a big game for sure, and there's a lot to talk about. So buckle up,
everybody.
Well, without further ado, why don't we get into things by starting about the gameplay? My perspective on the gameplay is it's very obviously it's a turn-based combat game. It's an open world. It's kind of an open world game that kind of guides you along a somewhat linear path.
Yeah.
There's a world to explore. Towns to explore. Very charming towns. You can interact with the town. And the people in the town, which is, I think, something for this era of gaming was pretty, I wouldn't say unheard of or revolutionary, but like to the extent at which this game went, there's not many games that did that. I can think of like just a handful, like, freaking, what's the Zelda game? Why am I?
Link to the Past?
Yeah, Link to the
The best game of all time.
The best game of all time, right. I forgot the best game of all time. Why am I even doing this podcast? But
damn.
Yeah, so, very charming in how you play the game, actually, and just kind of interact with everyone. But that being said, this game is really fucking annoying.
Damn, he said it.
Yeah, it's I gave it a second chance. And, I got a little bit farther after doing that, but man, it is so tedious in everything that you do.
Yep.
When it comes from like backtracking or just the combat can be really, really aggravating. Which is why I recommend playing it with save states, because if you don't play it with save states, you could end up losing to some random enemy that you didn't know was going to be super hard. So it's just... it's an aggravating game for sure. And some of the things like getting like the flower on your head, what is that called? Like confused, I guess?
I don't quite recall the name, but I do know what you're talking about. The status ailments in this game do tend to be very problematic.
Well, and I looked it up, and there's actually no real good way to like heal yourself from those status ailments. So there's one place that there's a couple of places that you can go, and usually there's only one nearby in the specific section where there's a really bad problem. But like you have to backtrack to it, heal yourself, and then go back through the entire tunnel that you were just in, which means you get confused over and over and over and over and over again. So basically you have to get lucky to get to the end of this particular segment of the game. And it's so aggravating.
Yeah.
There are some sections of the game, due to the nature of the environment that you're in, it's like a small corridor. You cannot escape an enemy. They're always faster than you. And so there are several times where it's just really, you keep coming back to the same enemies that you've already killed if you leave a room and you come back to that room. So that was kind of annoying.
Yeah.
That's a few of my gripes about the game so far.
Yeah, and I have some additional things to say that are pretty much on the same lines, but I think it's interesting to think about like other factors that make the game tedious. With regard to battling specifically, I think there's like a kind of unsatisfying mix of enemies that are complete pushovers and that enemies that will push you over without a second thought. And like, so that basically means you're oscillating between like kind of mashing A and like fighting for dear life and often losing.
Yeah.
And if not straight up losing, then, suffering some, a lot of damage and a lot of status ailments that you then have to backtrack a significant way, like you just mentioned. Of course, RNG is a factor in a lot of role-playing games. It always has been and probably always will be. But in this game, I feel like so many battles are determined by your attacks missing.
Yes.
Or the enemy's attacks missing, or the enemy's wasting a turn with some sort of like silly flavor text, which in terms of personality makes the game pretty cool because it'll say something like, oh, the bird is just hopping around. And it's like, oh, that's funny. That's a cute little mental image. But gameplay-wise, it means that you're relying on the enemy to lose a turn randomly.
Yeah.
Which just is not satisfying. It takes agency away from the player. And just kind of cheapens everything, I think.
For a turn-based game, it lacks a lot of strategy. And, there is strategy, and you can plan for things ahead of time. But when you have enemies like that, the strategy just goes out the window. You're just praying, ironically, that everything goes right. So it just really rubbed me the wrong way a lot of times, and ultimately is kind of the reason why I didn't play through most of the game. As I was playing through the game and going through some of these tedious parts and frustrating parts, the game felt like, while the story was really like engaging and I really enjoyed it, at some point it became a burden for me, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so, and the big reason why was the gameplay. So it's a big bummer.
Yeah, it does become a chore. And I will say that, at least in my experience, the first half or the first third of the game, I think, is way more difficult than the rest. Like, I think the specific part that you were talking about, like with the enemy that puts the plant on your head, like that part of the game, it turns out, is like famously difficult compared to like your abilities at that point in the game. And eventually, like once you get all 4 party members and once everyone has learned their PSI skills and everything, then like you start to get the tools to actually get through the game at a decent clip. And so like once you get past that point, it's still tedious, but it's not nearly as bad as it is like in that first third of the game. But still, like when you're talking about a game that's as long as this game is, that first third is a big slog to work through.
I think the tipping point for me was like I had gotten all like the characters, Paula and Pooh and
Jeff.
Jeff. Jeff. And I was feeling pretty good. We were learning abilities. We were upgrading. We were going through the game at a pretty good pace finally, like you had mentioned. And then I got to the pyramid, and these enemies were just like super strong, and it was really hard to get through. And I was like, I'm just exhausted from this game. So I wasn't able to get back to it. And I was like, let's just record this damn episode. It's been over a year.
Yeah. And like sometimes, of course, it's good to have completed a game, but if you were not motivated to complete the game, then that itself speaks volumes, right?
Right. I think so too. And the game's pretty long in general. I can't remember what the average playthrough was.
I think it's something like 30 hours on howlongtobeat.com.
But I feel like that 30 is very subject to like variation.
Yeah. I don't remember how long it took me to complete the game. Probably a good bit over 30 hours. And that was me like not using save states, trying to look up stuff as little as possible. That's another thing actually I wanted to mention is that like, especially in the beginning, like the first half or so of the game, it can be really difficult to like ascertain where you need to go, who you need to talk to.
Yes, it's so bad.
So like that's a different kind of tedium. The battles and all that implication, of course, can be tedious, but then you also have, not knowing where to go, which is its own source of frustration. And there is a character called the Hint Man who you can pay some like pretty small amount of money and he'll give you a hint, but sometimes that hint doesn't really work. When it does, it's really nice, and sometimes it does work, but the fact that he's even there as an option is like, we know this game is pretty confusing. Here's a guy that can potentially make it easier for you. And it's like, just make the direction a little more clear.
Yeah.
Like there's something to be said, of course, for exploring and like, not knowing exactly what to do, but there's a threshold. And I think this game exceeds that threshold, especially in the beginning.
And also considering the fact that you don't move too fast throughout the world, and it takes a long time to navigate through the world itself. And so, like, I'm really glad you mentioned this point, because I don't know why I'd almost forgotten about it. But, like, that is another reason I kind of put the game down the first time, was that just aimlessly wandering around, not knowing where to go, feeling like it was taking forever just to progress to the next section of the game, and it wasn't very clear. It was really frustrating. And I think looking it up later, I was like, oh, I think I didn't talk to the right brother. There's two brothers, and one is like the well put together brother, and the other one's kind of like all over the place.
Oh yeah, isn't it like the apple kid and the orange kid?
Yeah. So, like, I had talked to the wrong one and thought I didn't need to talk to the other one because he didn't have his shit together or something. It just wasn't very clear that I needed to go talk to him and then also wait for him to come up with an invention. It's just like they don't tell you those things. You're just supposed to just aimlessly wander around. It's a really bad, like, sense of direction, and it's very off-putting. So I would typically cap myself in terms of the amount of time I wanted to spend looking to get to the next portion. If I could reasonably figure it out, I would just continue on my way. But if I just got completely confused, I was like, I'm looking it up. I'm not doing this anymore.
There's a part of the game kind of towards the middle. Like, there's this underground labyrinth in the desert or something. And you've played Majora's Mask. You know about the trading sequence with all the mummies underneath, like, the well or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, I think you have to do that to get the mirror shield or something. I'm probably getting the details wrong. But anyway, similarly, this game has, like, this really long trading sequence in this labyrinth where you have to, like, go down a corridor, talk to a monkey, and he tells you, like, oh, I need some item. And then you have to go elsewhere in the labyrinth to get the item. And then behind that monkey, once you make him happy, there's, like, 3 other monkeys who all have their own items. And it's, like, this crazy mess. And eventually I was like, screw it. I just need to look up the map. Like, I'm not going to... Like, I don't have time to get lost in this labyrinth doing this, like, legitimate chore.
Yeah.
To get to the next part. And again, like, the game tries to make all of this worthwhile to varying degrees of success by having the characters and stuff be entertaining and colorful and interesting. But I think when we get to the content section, that's where I personally will talk more about that source of charm for the game. But as far as, like, the gameplay section of our review, I think oftentimes all those good things really struggle to make up for the weakness of the convolution, the unclarity, all that stuff, the tediousness.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. With that being said, I think I've said my piece on the gameplay for the most part. I'm trying to think of, like, because I feel like we haven't talked about a lot of positives of the game. I'm trying to think of something about the gameplay that is, like, fun. I guess I delved a little bit into, like, it's fun to interact with the world and the people within it, and it ties together really nicely. You don't have, like, when you know what to do, you know where you're going, and you're feeling pretty good about the combat, and you're just kind of going through the motions of the game, it actually isn't that bad. It's pretty entertaining because the story is very entertaining. So, like, interacting with that world is really nice. It's just there's several things along the way that make it very annoying. So yeah. I think that's pretty much a summation of what I was trying to say about this game.
I have one more, like, detailed comment that I want to mention because I think it is unique to EarthBound, or at least mostly unique to it.
Okay.
Or this game series, I should say, is the fact that in battle, you have a rolling HP meter. So whenever you get hits, it takes, like, a significant amount of time for your HP to actually decrease. And you can see the number decreasing like an odometer in your car.
Oh, yeah.
Odometers increase, they don't decrease. But, like, the animation is very similar. And that can actually add some interesting strategy because I think, like, again, it's been a long time since I actually played this game because of the story we mentioned earlier.
Right.
But I think, like, what that means is if you get critical damage, you do often have an opportunity to use another character to heal that fatally injured character. And it can become this interesting game of, like it is turn-based, but there's still kind of this pressure element of your HP ticking down before you lose the opportunity to do something about it. And I think, like, that's actually a very interesting part of the gameplay during the battles, which I think like sorely needed some sort of interesting thing to make up for the other shortcomings we spoke about. So I didn't want to mention that before we move on entirely.
True. On that same token, though, it's not very clear who goes in what order. There is a system of like who is faster than the other person, but it's not very like obvious until you have a familiarity with your enemy to know exactly what the outcome is going to be. So like when you first start fighting an enemy, it could be pretty scary.
Yeah. That's a good point. Like every time you meet a new enemy, you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
And it could be something like completely harmless looking and like absolutely wreck your shit.
That's true. Yeah, the enemy designs, which we'll talk about in the next section, can definitely not reflect their danger level.
Yeah,
which I think is a good thing. Like I think that adds to the positives of the game more than the negatives.
I would agree. Yeah, I think we're ready to give our scores. I'm trying something a little bit different this time. I'm going to kind of reflect on our comments. So beforehand, we would usually come up with our scores and rate it and all our notes and everything like that. I kind of wanted to do like more of a discussion before I kind of came up with my score. That being said, I am ready to give my score, or you can give your score first. Doesn't matter to me.
Why don't you go ahead? You've built it up so well.
Okay, I think I'm going to give it a 72.
That is interesting. I actually went a lot lower than you.
Damn, okay.
Which surprises me. I gave it a 60.
60.
Yeah.
Okay, let me think about it. Do I agree with that? I could see that. I could go lower. I think I might have felt pressure to rate it a little bit higher because it is EarthBound.
Yeah. I found it hard to rate this category because I don't play a lot of RPGs or a lot of JRPGs, and I'm not sure that you do either.
Yeah.
And so like it's not Hollow Knight where the gameplay is like what draws me to it. But I have to compare it to like other RPGs. But I also have to keep in mind that like there are things that I do think are legitimately bad, like genre aside. So I kind of wrestled with my rating for a while, but I don't think anyone's arguing that EarthBound is legendary because of the gameplay. So I decided I was happy giving it a 60. It's still 6 out of 10. Also, it's not not the worst score in the world.
Let me refine my score just a little bit. I'm going to go down to a 67 because you make some good points.
Damn. Lowering the score.
Yep.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
New trend here on the Interstate Gamers podcast. All right. Well, that moves us on to everyone's favorite section and everyone's favorite t-shirt, aesthetics. And we'll start with the visuales. Pete Boy, why don't you take it away?
With pleasure. Also, I'll say that my aesthetics t-shirt is literally my favorite t-shirt. And my friends comment on how much I wear it. And I'm like, yeah, this is the best.
Yeah, it's pretty up there for me too.
Yeah. So the visuals of EarthBound, it's interesting because like the overworld is usually like very simply drawn. So the game is presented in this kind of isometric style or viewpoint. On the overworld, the characters are mostly drawn pretty simplistically, like not too much detail. You know, if you're thinking about Stardew Valley or like Secret of Mana or other like, those are very different games actually, but like games with that really detailed pixel art style, this is not that at all. And especially not in the overworld. But then when you get into battles, like normally the battle sprites of the enemies are much more detailed. They can be very wacky designs, very, well, I'll get to the designs later, but like the point is the art can be a lot more detailed when you actually get into battle. And also the backgrounds of the battles themselves are very cool, very psychedelic, lots of like geometric patterns and colors. And if you guys watched me play this game on twitch.tv/do_4_real a year and a half ago, you would have noticed me like constantly complimenting the battle backgrounds. Like I think they're a phenomenal part of the game. But yeah, so like my general opening point is a very interesting difference between the overworld and the battle visuals.
You know, now that you say that, I would have to agree with that. I found the overworld to be like very charming in most aspects. I mean, there are some areas where it's like they did a good job of giving you like a feeling of where you are. So like most towns, I would say, have this sort of charming feel to them. They have their unique feel to each of them.
Yeah.
But you really got a sense of what was going on around you. They did a really good job of like immersing you with your environment. So I really enjoyed that about the visuals of the overworld. And like you said, I really like the pixel art stuff. It's very nostalgic. And I think it's aged really well with time. And then as you mentioned, it's very detailed on the battle animations and things like that, but like also at the same time kind of not detailed because the background is typically just like a black screen with some text that you have to choose. But like the sprites and things like that are really detailed, and the animations are very like you said, psychedelic. So it's a weird, interesting mix.
Yeah.
And I think it comes together really nicely. I think everything that they did visually was very intentional, and I think it was done really well.
I agree. Your comments about the visual style aging well is very interesting because at the time when this game came out in 94, 95, the visuals were actually like a common critique or criticism of the game. And it's one reason why people suspect that the game didn't sell well in the US at the time is because at the same time you had these other SNES RPG. Oh yeah, did we ever mention this game's on the Super Nintendo? I don't think we did.
Yeah.
This game's on the Atari 6900. On the SNES at this time, you had Secret of Mana, which came out like 2 years before this game, which was like absolutely gorgeous, super detailed, beautiful pixel art, like stuff of legends. And then you had Chrono Trigger, which came out like a month after this game, and Chrono Trigger was another beautiful JRPG, like extremely detailed, vibrant. And then you had EarthBound, which like by comparison to those games, at least the overworld, like it looks pretty elementary. If you're looking at it from a negative lens, you can say like, oh, this looks too simple. Like it looks like a kid could have drawn it, whatever. Nowadays, we look back at it, at least it sounds like you and I do, and we think like it's definitely a strong part of the game's charm and the identity, and that makes EarthBound special. But like back then, when these I think specifically the American audiences, like they didn't know what to expect, and like the marketing behind the game was all wonky and stuff, and then they see like these comparatively very simple graphics, and they're like, oh, this is it?
Yeah, those are very good points. I think that still kind of rings true today. Like you think of like games that come out today, they're super realistic graphics and things like that, and people are like, oh yeah, this is the best graphically looking game. But then some people, like maybe like a mainstream audience, would look at like pixel art games and be like, no interest. I think it could be something kind of similar there. I definitely think this game has its own flavor in the pixel art realm.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it unique, because nowadays pixel art games are kind of like a dime a dozen. So I think this brings a really kind of like a refreshing new flavor to that realm. And obviously it's not new, it's an older game, but like speaking from the context of 2022, I think it holds up really well.
Yeah. And because EarthBound has spawned like so many inspired by and even like straight up imitating games, like there are games whose art styles are similar to EarthBound's, but the quantity of those games and kind of like their presence in the overall gaming world is usually like smaller than other styles of pixel art.
Right.
So even though people are still like kind of imitating EarthBound in many ways, like it's not the most ubiquitous form of pixel art ever. So it still gets some of that, I guess, slightly less mainstream appeal, you might call it.
Right.
We've been talking a lot about the towns as locations in the game, but there's a lot beyond the towns as well. Like kind of in the second half of the game, you start exploring like these more, I guess, exotic areas, you could call it. Like you mentioned the pyramids.
Right.
Which is unfortunately, it sounds like that's where your run might have ended. But like you enter pyramids, you enter like these weird kind of underground, like space looking areas. Like there's enemy laboratories that are like hidden behind waterfalls. Near the end of the game, there's this area that is themed like with prehistoric nature and dinosaurs that are huge and all this stuff. And the way the game conveys that is by like treating the overworld totally differently, where your characters are like tiny little blobs of like 3 by 5 pixels. Like they're 1/3 of the size that they used to be in all the other overworlds. And the dinosaurs, by comparison, of course, are gigantic. And what's annoying about that is then it takes an extra long time to navigate the overworld because like you're moving very slowly. You're moving like at speed. But the fact that they did that in this specific part of the game, which is near the end also, so like you're kind of feeling the climax about to approach. Don't take that out of context. Like, it's a really cool visual trick that I just wanted to spend a little time talking about because when I first saw it, I was like, damn, this is really cool.
Yeah, that I kind of wish I'd gotten to that part because that does sound really cool. But I'd probably also be annoyed at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do a lot of visual tricks and things like that. Like they didn't slouch in the visuals at all, like in terms of storytelling. And I think that's really unique as well. Like it's not unique because several games have done that, but it's not just like, it's just like the subtle things that they do. And given the limitations of the game and the time that it came out and things like that, they really did put a lot of flavor in it. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, the flavor. The last thing I want to mention for visuals, which I briefly alluded to earlier, is the character designs and specifically the enemy designs. There are like a lot of enemies. In fact, probably most of the enemies in the game are some sort of like normal everyday object or person, but with some sort of twist, or person or creature, I should say, with some sort of twist. So like an alligator who's balancing on its tail, or a pair of floating eyeballs with lightning bolts for arrows, or lightning bolts for... Yeah, what did I say? Pair of floating eyeballs with lightning bolts for arrows. It's so absurd that it's difficult to actually say.
Editor's note. He still didn't say it right. He meant to say lightning bolts for eyebrows, not arrows.
But like, yeah, the quirkiness of this game, like the legendary LOL so random XD factor, definitely comes in large part from these enemy designs that are like very, like they'll stop you in their tracks. They're so weird.
Right.
And that is one thing that I loved about the game aesthetically, because the pixel like we mentioned, does a really great job of communicating these really crazy designs in a fun, detailed way.
Yeah, and to that point, it almost feels like, I mean, I guess this is kind of what they were going for, but like it does feel like a kid is like imagining this world and kind of playing it as an adult. It's like it brings you back to that imagination that you had as a kid and like the nostalgia factor of that. I think that's kind of what makes it so charming and so unique. It's just like how I'm pretty sure that was intentional. I don't know if it was like to appeal to a younger audience or like it was to appeal to like your sense of younger self, but that's definitely the feeling that I got from it when looking at these graphics.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting notion, like the idea of who this game was made for. And I think we can talk about that a little bit in the content section. But yeah, it definitely does evoke all of those things.
Yep.
We turned into King of the Hill. Greatest show of all time.
Yeah.
Well, I'm about ready to give my score for the visuales.
Yeah. What did you give it?
Give it a nice, hot, fresh AT.
AT. I'm going to give it a 92.
Nice.
I really enjoyed the visuals of this game.
They're pretty good. You know what else is pretty good, in my opinion? Spoiler alert.
Audio.
Why don't you start?
I can get us on that audio section. So the audio, I'm just kidding. Everyone knows by now, if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know I'm a big fan of sound effects. And I feel like this game does a pretty good job of sound effects. Like, you know, I wouldn't say anything earth-shattering, but
damn.
maybe earth-bounding. But I don't know. There's just several little, like, how do I put this? It sounds like you're in space constantly. It's like these weird, like, alien, like you kind of expect you'd be like navigating through space, which there's a lot of spacecraft in this game.
True.
So I guess that kind of makes sense. There's a lot of allusions to space and aliens in this game, but it's like pew 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 pew.
Yeah, it's a very bleep bloop kind of like the Mr. Krabs meme, beep bloop or whatever. It's a very bleepy bloopy audio.
Yeah, and I really like that in terms of like the sound effects, and there's a lot of that involved, and there's a lot of sound effects that happen in the overworld. It's been a while, so it's kind of hard for me to specifically pinpoint something, but like I remember them kind of conveying really well what was going on in the world, and the sound effects kind of made sense, but were also charming in a way. And then there's the soundtrack, which is also, I think, is really pretty good, and is very fun to listen to and just kind of like stop and take it all in. And it also kind of really gives you a feeling of when you're in a new environment and there's like this new like soundtrack or the sound, you're just like, wow, this really adds to the feeling of where I'm at. And usually it involves a lot of synthesizer stuff. It's like, kind of 80s feeling. It's just, I really like that.
The palette of sounds that they use for most of this game is very like spacey and bleep bloopy and synthesizer reliant, but it does so in such a way that to me feels kind of unsettling.
Yeah.
Even for the positive moments in the game, like there's just something I can't pinpoint about the exact sounds that they use that makes everything just kind of surreal or dreamlike, or like there's an underbelly of like, despair or darkness or something, which there is because like the plot of the game is really all about that. But I really like that. I think that's a huge strength for the game. I also, I just talked about all these like elements of kind of darkness and stuff in the music, but there's also a lot of variety in like the genres of music that are represented at different times. Like you have these characters called the Runaway Five, who are a band, and they play like kind of blues rock music.
Yeah.
There's several scenes in the game where you like just straight up watch them do a concert, like a short concert, obviously. But like, they wrote these like blues rock tracks for that band. And then they have some enemies who have kind of like a Latin, I'm not good with Latin American genres, but like they have Latin American style of music soundtracking those specific enemies. And like, there's a lot of variety in the genres. Like I said earlier. So as a music nerd, that's a very cool thing to hear. And it's cool to like get a glimpse into the personalities of the composers, because they must be people who are like just such music lovers of all kinds,
Right. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Well, there's one more very music nerd thing that I want to say. This game had a lot of interesting use of sampling, like taking samples from existing songs and repurposing them in strange ways. The biggest example that I can think of this is in an area at like the very, very, very end of the game called the Cave of the Past. And you visit this area. At the end of the game when you're ready to go confront Gigas, aka Goo Goo Gas, or whatever, however you want to pronounce it. I think Gigas is the correct pronunciation. You visit this area, the Caves of the Past, but then you have to go back in time to like access the rest of the caves. Like you go back in time to fight Gigas, and this is kind of his lair, his hideout.
Right.
But there's two different music themes for the area. There's one when you're in the present day, and then one when you're in the past. The theme for the present day location basically takes a couple notes from the very beginning of a Beatles song and like just plays them at different pitches. And it's like a very dissonant yet triumphant sounding song. That's like, it kind of pumps you up for like the end of the game. Like, oh yeah, this is kind of inspiring, but it's also very weird and dark.
Right.
And so then you go back into the past and you're in the same location, but it looks totally different. And it's way scarier. And the music for that section, they took a sample from a Beach Boys song, like a vocal section where they're all going like, Deendra. But they take that and they like make the pitch really low and then really high, and they have all this crazy delay that's like going back and forth in your headphones. It is like super, super disturbing.
Wow.
That comparison between the two is just phenomenal. And what's even more interesting, if I can nerd out for 10 more seconds,
sure,
is that the Beatles and the Beach Boys have like a really long intertwined history as bands. And like they were constantly like influencing each other and kind of competing with each other and stuff. So like the fact that they did that with these samples and turn them into these crazy soundtracks is just amazing to me.
Wow. Yeah. When you add those pieces of information to it, that's really cool. I didn't know that because I didn't get that far, but that's crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, audio pretty good.
Audio pretty good. I hope it gets above a 50 here. Jeez. I'll go ahead and give it a score. I'm gonna give it with that piece of information, I feel like it's gonna raise it up a little bit. So I'll give it a 94.
94. That was a good year.
Yeah, good year.
My score was also a good year, giving it a 95.
95. Wow, we were pretty on the money there.
Yeah. Finally, I've given a higher score than Case Slugs.
Yeah.
For one section.
All right. Well, that moves us on to our final section of content. Also a t-shirt you can buy from the you just head on over to the igcast.com. You can find our store link there.
True.
Yeah, so content, Pete Boy. I know you have a lot to elaborate on here, so why don't you take the lead?
I do indeed. Yeah, to be fair, actually, a lot of it is kind of what we discussed in gameplay.
True.
As with many games, the two things are connected. I will start by reiterating what my favorite website, howlongtobeat.com, had to say, which was, again, 30 hours for the average playthrough. But, I'm pretty sure that took into account, like, the conveniences of modern gaming, like the save states, like fast forwarding, like whatever. Because I'm pretty sure it took me quite a bit longer than that.
I mean, even when I played it, I was on a path to spend more than 30 hours on it. I really need to look how much time I did spend on it because I feel, I can't because of the way it's set up.
Dang.
Never mind.
But anyway, that's not like a super long time for games in the JRPG genre. But like the facts that, all the other things we've talked about in the gameplay section that make the game tedious are difficult in ways that are not good.
Yeah.
Can contribute to that length being a real problem. I think that the narrative of this game, part of the reason it's so strong, I think, is because of the amount of time that you spend in the world and with the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you have these recurring characters who come back and back and back throughout the journey. But I would love there to have been like some fat that was trimmed, some way to just condense the experience a little bit while still keeping that impact. I don't know how that could have been done exactly, but I think if this game came out nowadays, it would sorely need something like that.
Yeah, or like if the gameplay had just been fixed, I think the content would have been perfect, honestly.
Actually, that's a good point too.
Yeah, like if everything was like all the grievances I have with the game were just addressed in like a future patch, like EarthBound remastered. It could be rather enjoyable. I feel like a lot of people might be upset with what I would want fixed, that it would take away a lot from what the game was, because I know there's a lot of hardcore fans out there, but speaking from an objective point of view, I think it really needs to be addressed. But the content overall, like we've talked several times about how the writing of the game, and heck, the developer of the game was like a writer himself. So, like obviously it's going to have some good writing, but it was, in my opinion, it was phenomenal, like storytelling and things like that.
Yeah.
And the world and just how you interact with everything in the world was very charming, very interesting. When you actually get to those points and you figure out what you need to do, it's all very interesting. And it kept me really engaged for a while. The pacing is definitely something that kind of lessens that value and ultimately was the reason that I stopped. But if you could just address those problems of the game, I think the game could end up being a lot better. And it might not be a big deal for some people. And so that's why it's like one of their favorite games of all time, because it does have that element of just like really good storytelling, really good world building, character building, things like that. And it's just so unique. It's just like the person who wrote this game or developed this game, or the people, I should say, because I know there's not just one, but like they did a really good job of making everything feel so unique. Like every area that you went to, every enemy that you encountered, and in said areas, it was just very intentional and very different. And it's just like it really did a good job of immersing you into this very unique, I wouldn't say vibrant, but like there was just some places were really vibrant and others were just like really dark and had a really just like scary undertone. And so just all of that combined together, I think makes for a really good amount of content.
Yeah. I could repeat everything that you said, but I will instead supplement it with this game is also really funny a lot of the time.
True.
Like, we've been talking about, to very oversimplify it, like the happy versus sad nature, but like there's a lot of just really funny moments, funny lines of dialogue, like lines that are, probably more intended for like adults.
Yeah.
Which is funny because this game came out before the ESRB existed, so they didn't even like have to give it a rating, which is an interesting thought experiment. Like, what would they have rated this game? There's a bunch of references to real world things. Like, I think there's one line of dialogue that like straight up mentions the Beatles by name. And I'm like, what the hell? You could do that? I might be misremembering. I'm pretty sure that's right, though. But yeah, like, I just wanted to not let that go unsaid, is that like the game is just hilarious a lot of the time.
It is really funny. And there is a lot of like allusions to like real world adult stuff. So I guess going back to that question of who is the target audience, it does a good job of navigating, like it could be both, like the subtle, like adult humor that's thrown in there. As a kid, you could just keep powering forward and not really care what they're talking about. But as an adult, you just you chuckle to yourself because you get it.
Yeah. And not just adult humor too, but just like kind of sentimental moments that are more in line with like the adult experience. Like I can't think of an example right now, but like there's characters who say pretty deep stuff that like as a child you might not be able to relate to.
True. That is a very good point.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you have those moments, but then you also have a lot of like very impactful cutscenes emotionally, in my opinion, that are about like they're kind of the more kid-friendly message of like you have to be strong, you have to be brave, and all this stuff. And like, which when I say it that way, it sounds pretty trite, but in the context of the game had already put me in that kind of nostalgic mode, like you had mentioned earlier. And like getting those messages again as an adult after having, lived a good chunk of my life already, like it kind of, as the kids say, hits different. And I just found that to be very strong.
Yeah, it does a really good job of, I guess, as an adult, like really getting in touch with your feelings. And like, I think being older and playing this game, it definitely feels a certain type of way. And I think obviously from what we've said, you can kind of gather that, but it couldn't go unsaid that it does a really good job of, I don't know if it's like you call it a good job or I don't know, but just like really, I don't know. It's weird. I had something better I was going to say, but then when we got to the actually point of saying it, I was like, oh man, this is coming out terrible.
EarthBound renders us
speechless.
How ironic. I was about to say EarthBound renders us. God bless America. EarthBound renders us speechless. There we go.
Yeah.
I said it.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to know, Kevin, I know I've pestered you about this a few times. Did you end up watching the final battle / ending sequence?
Nah.
All right.
Didn't feel like I needed it. I'm just kidding. I did.
Okay, good. I was about to move on anyway and forgive you, but
no, I did.
So what did you think about that?
Kind of crazy. I think I'm missing a few things. I learned that I could pretty much string together like a lot of things, but for the most part, I think there's some gaps in the story that I missed. I don't know how Pokey got to be. Like, I know the evolution of Pokey becomes like very, like he becomes more corrupt over time. Not that he was ever a good person to begin with.
Yeah.
But he becomes like he interacts with the main villain, but he's almost kind of like the main bad guy in a sense.
Yeah, like he's the one who you're like kind of constantly following him throughout the world. And he's the one who's very visible, but at the end he's like the henchman of Gigas.
But then like Gigas becomes like this, he's like this interdimensional monster that like envelops everything about that dimension, and you're like fighting him.
It's very weird.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's trippy. And then there's the part where like as you're defeating him, and like, sorry if you haven't played this game, this is spoiling it for you, but like as you're defeating him, like I thought this was really cool, but it was like the more static is like in the screen. It's like a TV screen going blank, and then eventually does go blank, and you're like, the anxiety's over, and it's just like it's this very deflating feeling of just like kind of relief, but also exhaustion.
Yeah.
That I got from it. And especially if you're like actually playing it, I can only imagine the feeling that you get after kind of this like anxious moment of like everything's going to shit and we need your help. It kind of reminded me of Dragon Ball Z, if I'm being honest. It's like, oh shit, we need your help. You know, let's gather a spirit bomb, which is kind of what happens.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned earlier, you literally have to pray to win.
Yeah, exactly. Pray to win.
Pray to win.
which was really cool. I think tying that into there is really sweet, really endearing. Like you get help from like all the friends that you've made along the way, which, you know, we all need a little help from people we've met along the way in life.
True.
And it's nice to see like the people who care about those kids, like really like, I feel like something is wrong, and then like I need to just pray for their safety, and like it ends up helping them out in some magical spiritual way, which is really, really cool. And
yeah,
it was really sweet, and also really like it is kind of terrifying. He's just like this interdimensional monster. I don't know how you got to that dimension also.
Yeah, that has, yeah, you like end up going back in time and doing weird stuff. It's very interesting. And pretty ambiguous. Like there's billions of fan theories about what exactly the situation is to this day. Yeah, so I will say, as someone who actually got to the end, I was in tears at the ending of the game, from just like the rush of emotions from, I mean, like the fight itself is very anxiety inducing, like for the reasons that you mentioned. The sound design, like all the elements of the game come together to make that fight as otherworldly and as disturbing as possible. And then the screen, you know, flickers and blanks out, like you said. And then you have like the really happy kind of ending scene where you're encouraged to like walk around and go talk to all the people like in the world that you've saved. And you have all this closure. And like, I was just awash with like relief and like some sort of love for the characters I'd met along the way.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even expect. And yeah, like I straight up cried. The amount of any sort of media that could do that to me is very small.
I feel like the grind of this game really helps that too, because it's kind of exhausting. And you know, watching the video, I was like, man, I would feel so relieved and just like, finally. Yeah. So I could see that like kind of emotion being really present there.
Yeah. The ending of the game is what made the entire experience worth it for me.
Nice. Yeah, I kind of wish I had gotten to the end, but it just really, yeah. Well, I think we've really just culminated everything into this content score. So why don't you give your content score?
You know, I kind of want to increase my score a little bit. I'm not sure.
You were thinking about that emotional ending. You're like,
yeah,
how could I give it anything less than a 150?
150. Never before seen. No, I'm going to stick to my original guns. I'm going to give it a 90.
A 90, okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with something similar. I think I'm going to go like 91.
91. Yeah, for me, I think I originally gave this a 95, but I think like the tediousness of the gameplay and the length of the game itself are pretty closely related.
Mm.
And so like I felt like I just needed to nerf the content score a little bit, but like with the huge asterisk of this game made me cry in a good way. So very, very good in that regard.
So I guess, so like thinking about it though, I'm looking at my score and I gave audio a 94 and visuals a 92. So am I saying that the aesthetics are better than the content?
Mm. The aesthetics also have to do with the contents.
True, that's true. It's true.
It's all related.
Okay, I'll stick with it. So we've got a 91 and a 90.
Very good. We started out pretty diverse in our scores for the first two categories, but we really came together.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be too, well, I guess visuals is pretty different. Okay, yeah. Well, with that being said, it's time for us to do our number crunching. So take a few messages from our sponsors and we'll be right back.
All right, we have finished with our epic number crunching. We will start, as always, by recapping our individual scores before synthesizing them into the IG score. So for me, I gave gameplay a 60, visuals an 80, audio a 95, and content a 90. So the Pete Boy overall score for EarthBound is a 79.2.
Damn, almost a B. So I gave gameplay a 67, visuals a 92, audio a 94, and content a 91, bringing my overall score to an 83.7. So just a little bit higher than yours, which is not something I would have expected from the outcome.
Me neither. I was laughing about that during the number crunching as just inform the viewers back home.
But that may be due to a little bit of difference on how we approach the ratings itself. Like mine's a little more like detailed with like the ones and twos, and yours is like a little more rounded. So maybe that's why. I don't know. But either way, it's interesting to think about for sure. But that does make our IG score an 81.4, which if you're keeping along with the number crunching. I wonder if there's a fan that like kind of goes out of their way to like keep up with the ratings as we go along, and they'll be like, "Oh, I know exactly where." I have my doubts that actually happens, but it'd be cool. It's nice to think about. But anyway,
tweet at us if you do that.
Yeah. That's going to put it 39th out of 51.
39th out of 51. So pretty far below the halfway point. But as we always say, we've reviewed a lot of very good games on this show.
True. It is still, an overall score of 81.4. So I'd say that a game in the 80s would probably like be very accurate to where I would put this game. And I don't think it's aged particularly well. And it's definitely not up there with the 90 games in our books. So I think it's fair. And I know there's probably some that really enjoy this game. It's their greatest game of all time, yada, yada. But I don't know. I think in terms of what we are scoring it, this is a good spot.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, I said this specifically about the gameplay, but overall, it was hard for me to rate this game because like it's hard when like the ending struck me so hard in my feelings,
right?
Like and in a very good way. It makes me want to like recommend this game to a lot of people, but the problem is that the journey on the way there can be very arduous, as we've mentioned countless times by this point,
right?
So like so that part of the game is very good, but there's this other part that I don't think is very good at all, necessarily. I mean, I said 6 out of 10, which is still above that, whatever. The point is, EarthBound, very interesting game. If you have never played it and you would like to, I would say, to like kind of go in with the expectations of the grind factor being real and, use modern gameplay techniques to make that easier for you. Because I think like the journey of getting through all the locations and meeting all the characters and hearing all the music is phenomenal. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah, the game's much more enjoyable when you use save states and you look to see where you need to go, and maybe some tips and tricks on the combat. Although there are some sections that you just can't do anything about, and you're really going to feel that pain.
Yeah. Now, the question on everyone's mind, I'm sure, is, Peter, does this game deserve to be as widely revered, as much of a cult classic as it is? Is this a game that deserves all of the fan art, all of the fan books, even all of the publication, all of the worshiping? I would say, yeah, I'd say so, pretty much.
Yeah, I could really see that why people are big fans of this game.
Yeah.
It's obviously because of the storytelling. So it's going to wrap it up for this episode. But before we, head on out, we have to list all of our plentiful and lovely patrons. Shout outs to Justin Probst and Ryan Everett for your generous patronage.
Hell yeah.
We really appreciate you, and you literally keep us going. And I know we haven't done an episode in a while, but it's because we really wanted to put all our efforts into this game. That's why.
Indeed. I was talking about just the sense of like relief and joy at the end of the video game EarthBound, but I'm also feeling a similar sense at the end of the review of EarthBound.
Yeah, I am
the
too.
anticipation has been so high. People have been clamoring for us to record and release this episode. And now that we've done it, we can now move on to a couple other episodes that we would like to record at some point before closing out this season. So still more yet to come.
Yeah. If you can believe it, the season is still going on.
Yep. Wild.
Well, it's been a really fun episode. I really enjoyed this, and I really can't wait till the next one. So hopefully we can do that somewhat sooner than this time frame it took for this one.
Yeah.
But until next time, love you too, guys.
Love you too. Take care.